Tom lived on the edge of town, far from the noise of crowded streets. His ranch spread across wide open land where the grass moved with the wind and the sun rose bright every morning. He worked hard to keep the place alive. Every day started early with feeding the horses, fixing fences, and taking care of small jobs that never seemed to end. Yet he loved every part of it. To him, the ranch was more than land, it was his peace and his pride. Tom had built this life with his own hands. He was not rich, but he was free. On weekends, he would sit on the porch with a cup of tea and listen to the quiet. Sometimes his biker friends came by, and the sound of their engines filled the air. They were not wild or careless. They were men and women who liked the open road, the brotherhood, and the feeling of freedom. Together they called themselves the Iron Riders, and they were as loyal as family. One bright morning, Tom was fixing a loose gate when he heard loud voices. He looked up and saw 3 men walking across his land. They wore matching jackets with the letters HOA stitched on the front. Tom knew what it meant. It stood for Homeowners Association. He had never seen them on his ranch before. They were not part of his life, and he never thought they would bother him. But here they were, walking straight through his field without asking. The tallest one shouted, "You're in violation." His voice carried across the land like thunder. Tom frowned. He was calm by nature, but he did not like strangers raising their voices on his land. "What violation?" Tom asked, standing still by the gate. His hands were rough from work, but his voice stayed steady. The men kept coming closer. "Your fence is not approved. Your barn color is against community rules. You have too many vehicles parked on your land. This is a violation." Tom stared at them, unsure if he had heard right. His ranch was outside town. It was not inside any neighborhood run by the HOA. He had bought it free and clear, far from their rules. "This is my land," Tom said. "I built everything here myself. Your rules do not reach this place." But the men did not slow down. They waved papers in their hands as if the papers gave them power. They shouted about fines and orders. They told him he had to change his barn, his gate, even the way he parked his bikes. Tom felt anger rising inside. Not the kind that made him lose control, but the kind that made him stand tall. He knew his rights. He knew they had no place here. But still, they had stepped onto his ranch, shouting, pointing, and trying to scare him. "You should leave," Tom said. His voice was firm now. "This is private property." The tallest man shook his head. "We will come back. If you do not follow the rules, you will pay the price. You are in violation." With that, they turned and walked back the way they came, still muttering and waving their papers. Tom stood still for a moment, breathing slowly. He was not afraid, but he was not happy either. He felt a storm brewing. He knew these men were not done. They would return, maybe louder, maybe with more people. He also knew one thing for certain. He was not alone. That evening, the Iron Riders came by the ranch. The sound of their bikes rolled through the land, deep and steady. One by one, they parked near the barn. Tom's closest friend among them, a man named Mark, stepped forward. He was older, with lines on his face from years on the road, but his eyes were sharp. "What's going on, Tom?" Mark asked. "You look like you've seen trouble." Tom told them what had happened. He spoke of the men who walked onto his land, shouting about rules and violations that made no sense. The crew listened in silence. Some shook their heads. Some clenched their fists. But none of them laughed. They knew this was serious. Mark nodded slowly when Tom finished. "They crossed a line," he said. "This ranch is yours. Nobody has the right to walk in and shout at you like that." Another rider, a woman named Rose, spoke up. "They think they can scare you with papers and words. But they don't know you, Tom. And they don't know us." The crew stood together, their leather jackets catching the last light of the setting sun. They were more than riders. They were a family bound by loyalty. Each of them had seen hard times, and each of them knew the value of standing together. Tom felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He was not alone in this fight. Whatever came next, he knew the Iron Riders would be there with him. The night grew dark, but the ranch was alive with voices and laughter. The crew stayed late, making plans and sharing stories. Tom listened but kept thinking about the men from the HOA. He wondered why they had targeted him. He wondered how far they would go. One thing was clear. They had not expected him to resist. They thought he would bow his head and follow their rules. But they were wrong. Tom was not that kind of man. When the crew finally rode out, Tom stood on the porch and watched their tail lights fade into the night. The ranch was quiet again, but he no longer felt the same peace. He knew change was coming. He could almost hear the echo of the tall man's voice calling across the field, "You're in violation." Tom clenched his fists, then relaxed them. Tomorrow would be another day, and he would be ready. Whatever game the HOA men were playing, they would learn soon enough that this ranch was not theirs to control. The stars shone bright above the land, and Tom whispered to himself, "This is my home. No one takes that away." And with that, part one of his story had only just begun. The next morning, Tom woke up before sunrise as always. He brewed his tea, stepped onto the porch, and looked across the fields. The land was calm, the air was fresh, and the horses were waiting near the fence for their feed. For a moment, everything felt normal again. But in the back of his mind, the memory of the three men shouting "You're in violation" stayed alive. Tom was not a man who liked to worry, but he believed in being prepared. He worked through the morning, fixing tools, checking locks on the barn, and tightening boards on the fence. He did not want trouble, but he would not allow anyone to walk in and disrespect his ranch again. By midday, he was leading one of his horses to water when he heard the sound of a truck engine. It was not the deep rolling sound of a biker's motorcycle. It was a loud, sharp pickup engine, moving too fast for comfort. Tom turned and saw a white truck coming down the dirt road, dust rising high behind it. The same three HOA men stepped out of the truck when it stopped near the gate. They did not knock, they did not wait for permission, they just marched forward again. This time, they had clipboards and a camera. The tallest man, the same one who had shouted yesterday, walked ahead with a proud look on his face. "Tom," he said, raising his chin, "we told you. You are in violation. We are here to take pictures and write reports. You will face a fine if you do not follow our rules." Tom put the rope of the horse over the fence and walked toward them slowly. His steps were calm, but his eyes were sharp. "You came back without permission," he said. "This is private land. I told you yesterday, your rules do not apply here." The men did not listen. One of them raised the camera and began snapping pictures of the barn, the fence, and even Tom's horse. Another wrote quickly on the clipboard, shaking his head as if every detail was wrong. "You have too many bikes," the tallest man said. "You cannot have that many vehicles here. The barn color is not allowed. The fence design is not approved. You are breaking rules. Tom's jaw tightened. He stepped closer and spoke in a low voice. This is not your community. This is not your land. You are trespassing. The man smirked. We'll see what the law says about that. Tom did not move. He simply pointed at the gate. Leave. The three men exchanged looks. They were not expecting him to stand so firm. Finally, the tallest one lowered his clipboard. We'll be back, he said. And next time, you'll regret ignoring us. They turned, climbed into their truck, and drove off, leaving dust behind them. Tom stood still, watching the road long after they were gone. He felt the same storm inside his chest that he had felt yesterday. They were trying to scare him with papers and cameras. But he was not a man who bent so easily. That evening, the Iron Riders returned again. The sound of their engines echoed across the fields, and soon the ranch was filled with the smell of fuel and the warmth of friends. Mark was the first to step forward. They came back, didn't they? He asked. Tom nodded. He told the crew about the camera, the clipboards, and the threat of fines. The riders listened, each one silent until he finished. They're not just making noise anymore, Rose said. They're building a case. They want to pull you into their world and make you play by their rules. They don't know who they're dealing with, another rider said. His name was Ben, a quiet man with a heavy beard and steady eyes. You've got the law on your side, Tom. This ranch is outside their reach. They're trying to scare you into giving up. Tom sighed. I don't want a fight. I just want them to stay away. Mark put a hand on his shoulder. Sometimes you don't choose the fight. Sometimes it comes to you. What matters is how you stand when it does. The crew gathered around a wooden table by the barn. They spoke of plans, ideas, and ways to protect the ranch. Rose suggested putting up signs that clearly marked the property line. Ben offered to bring a lawyer friend who could explain the truth in writing. Others promised to keep their eyes open around town in case the HOA men spread lies. As they talked, the sun sank low, painting the sky with shades of orange and red. The riders were not only friends. They were problem solvers, each one bringing a piece of strength to the table. Finally, Mark spoke again. We should pay them a visit. Not to fight. Not to shout. Just to let them know that Tom is not alone. When people see you standing together, they think twice about pushing harder. The riders nodded in agreement. Tom listened quietly. He trusted his crew. They never acted wild, they never caused chaos. They believed in respect. But they also believed in loyalty. All right, Tom said at last. We'll do it. We'll show them that this ranch has family. The decision was made. They would ride to the HOA office, not with anger, but with unity. They would speak clearly and firmly, the way men and women of the road always had. That night, as the riders prepared to leave, Tom stood by the gate and watched them start their bikes. The sound was powerful, like thunder rolling across the land. He knew that sound carried a message. It said strength. It said loyalty. It said nobody stood alone. When the last tail light disappeared into the night, Tom turned back to the quiet ranch. He looked at his barn, his fence, his horses, and his land. Everything here was his. Every board, every nail, every field of grass carried his sweat and effort. He would not allow strangers with clipboards to take that away. The stars glowed above him as he whispered, "Tomorrow will be theirs to hear us." And with that, Tom walked inside his home, ready for whatever would come next. The morning sun rose slowly over the hills, painting the land with gold. Tom stood by his porch, tightening the strap on his gloves. Today was the day the Iron Riders would ride together to the HOA office. He felt the weight of the decision but also the strength of unity. His ranch was not just dirt and wood. It was his life, and today he would show the HOA men that they could not shake him. By mid-morning, the sound of engines filled the road. One by one, the riders arrived, their bikes lined up near the barn. The crew was ready, leather jackets on, helmets shining in the light. Mark walked up to Tom and gave a firm nod. "Are you ready?" Mark asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," Tom replied. Rose adjusted her gloves and smiled. "They think they can push you around. Today, they'll see the truth." The riders mounted their bikes. Tom climbed onto his own, a black and silver machine he had rebuilt with his hands. When the engines roared together, the ground itself seemed to hum. Birds scattered from the trees, and dust lifted from the road as they rolled out of the ranch in one powerful line. The ride into town was long but steady. People turned their heads as the Iron Riders passed. Some smiled and waved, some simply stared. The crew was not there to cause fear. They rode with discipline, wheels in line, voices silent, the sound of engines alone sending their message. At last, they reached the small building that served as the HOA office. It was neat and square, with trimmed bushes and a flag by the door. A few cars were parked outside, but the quiet of the place cracked when the roar of the riders arrived. The engines cut off one by one, leaving silence behind, but the air was heavy with their presence. Tom removed his helmet and set it on his bike. He walked forward with Mark and Rose by his side. The rest of the riders stood in a wide circle, calm but watchful. The glass door opened, and the tallest HOA man stepped out. He wore the same proud expression, though this time it was thinner, less certain. Behind him came the two others, holding clipboards like shields. "You again," the tall man said. His voice was strong, but Tom heard the strain in it. "You have no business here." Tom's voice was steady. "You stepped onto my ranch twice. You shouted at me. You tried to scare me with rules that do not belong there. I came today to tell you face to face, this stops now." The man laughed shortly, though his eyes darted to the circle of riders. "We are the association. We have rules. You cannot ignore us." Mark stepped forward. His tone was calm but sharp. "You don't own that ranch. It is not in your community. You know that, and yet you crossed his land, shouting like you had power there. That was wrong." Rose spoke next. "You waved papers, but papers don't make you the owner of his land. Tom built that ranch. He pays for it. He cares for it. You have no claim there." The riders nodded in quiet agreement, their presence like a wall of strength. The tall man shifted on his feet. He tried to keep his voice bold. "If he refuses to follow our rules, we will fine him. We will take it to court." Ben, the quiet rider with the heavy beard, stepped from the circle. His deep voice carried weight. "Then take it to court. You will lose. The ranch is not yours. And when the truth comes out, everyone will see you for what you are, men who try to scare others with empty threats." The HOA men looked uneasy now. The clipboards shook slightly in their hands. The tall man opened his mouth, but no sound came at first. He glanced at the building behind him as if searching for support that was not there. Tom took a slow step closer, his eyes never leaving the man's face. "I will say this one last time. Stay away from my land. Don't walk my fields, don't shout at my gate, don't take pictures of my home. My ranch is not under your rules, and it never will be." For a moment, silence filled the space. The only sound was the soft rustle of the flag above the building. Then the tall man's shoulders slumped. He looked at the riders, at their calm faces, at their steady stance. He seemed smaller now, like a man who had built his pride too high and finally saw it crumble. "We will check the records again," he muttered. "If it is true, then perhaps this is outside our reach." "It is true," Mark said firmly. "And you know it? Do not come again." The riders stood still until the HOA men turned and walked back inside the office. The glass door closed behind them, leaving the crew alone outside. Tom exhaled slowly. His body felt lighter, though his mind was sharp. He knew this was not the end. Men like that did not give up easily. But he also knew something important: they were no longer so bold when faced with unity. The riders mounted their bikes again. Engines rumbled to life, filling the street with sound. People peered out from shop windows nearby, watching the crew ride off together. As the town faded behind them, Rose called out over the engines, "They won't forget today." "No," Tom replied, his voice firm. "And neither will I." The ride back to the ranch felt different. The road was the same, the land was the same, but the weight on Tom's shoulders had lifted. He was not just a man with a ranch anymore. He was a man with a family of riders who stood beside him, and together they had spoken the truth. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was low and golden. The crew parked their bikes, and laughter filled the air again. The tension of the morning was gone, replaced by the comfort of victory. Mark raised his hand, and the riders gathered around. "Today we showed them what respect looks like. We did not shout. We did not fight. We stood firm, and they stepped back. That's how family works." Tom nodded. His voice was quiet but steady. "Thank you. Each of you. I could not have done this alone." "You'll never be alone," Ben said. "Not while the Iron Riders stand." The evening grew calm. The horses grazed near the fence, the wind whispered through the fields, and the sound of quiet laughter carried from the barn. The storm was not over, but Tom knew he was ready for whatever came next. The tall man's voice still echoed in his mind, but it was softer now, weaker. "You're in violation" no longer sounded like a threat. It sounded like the cry of someone who had already lost. And as the stars began to appear, Tom sat on the porch, strong in the knowledge that his land was safe, his crew was loyal, and his story was far from finished. The next few days on the ranch were peaceful again. Tom woke early, fed the horses, worked on the fences, and felt the calm of the open land. The Iron Riders came by in the evenings, and together they shared meals and laughter. For a while, it seemed the storm had passed. But Tom knew better than to believe the HOA men would give up so easily. Men who walked boldly onto another person's land did not simply vanish after one warning. They would look for another way, a quieter way, to pressure him. He was right. On the 5th day after the visit to the HOA office, Tom drove into town for supplies. He needed nails, rope, and a new saddle strap. The hardware store was quiet, filled with the smell of wood and metal. Tom greeted the shopkeeper, bought what he needed, and walked back to his truck. As he loaded the supplies into the back, he noticed two strangers standing by the corner of the street. They were looking at him, whispering to each other. Their suits were too neat for a small town, and their briefcases looked out of place. When they noticed him staring, they quickly turned and walked away. Tom frowned. He had seen that look before. People sent by others, people who carried messages without speaking. He climbed into his truck and drove back to the ranch, but the thought stayed heavy in his mind. That evening, when the riders arrived, Tom told them about the men in suits. The crew listened carefully. "They're changing their game," Mark said. "If they can't scare you with shouts, they'll try papers. Contracts, letters, legal tricks. They'll try to trap you that way." Rose leaned against her bike. "That means they want to wear you down. They'll keep sending words until you start believing them." Ben nodded slowly. "Words can be dangerous when written the wrong way. They twist the truth, and suddenly a man starts to doubt himself." Tom sighed. "I don't fear words, but I don't like games played in shadows. If they want to face me, they should stand on my land and speak to me, not hide behind strangers." The riders agreed. They decided to stay close in the coming days, to watch and listen. They believed that the HOA men were planning something, and they would not let Tom face it alone. Their guess proved right. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived in Tom's mailbox. The paper inside was long and filled with complicated words. At the top was the HOA logo. The letter claimed that Tom owed money for community fees and that he must pay within 30 days or face legal action. Tom read it twice. He almost laughed, but his anger burned stronger. His ranch was not part of their community. He owed them nothing. Yet here it was, a letter written to look official, designed to scare him into paying. When the riders gathered that evening, Tom showed them the letter. The crew studied it under the light of the barn. Mark tapped the paper with his finger. "This is what we expected. They're trying to trap you with fear. If you pay once, even by mistake, they'll claim you belong to their rules." Rose shook her head. "It's not just about money. It's about control. They want to put a chain around your land with paper instead of rope." Ben crossed his arms. "Then we answer with truth. My friend, the lawyer, will help. He knows how to cut through words like these." The plan was set. Ben's friend came to the ranch the next morning. He was a calm man with sharp eyes, used to reading fine lines in thick papers. He studied the letter and smiled. "This has no ground," he said. "It is nothing but a scare. They cannot claim fees from land that does not belong to their community. I will write them back, clear and firm. After that, they will know they are wasting their time." Tom felt relief, but he also knew men like the HOA leaders would not stop at one trick. They would send more letters, more strangers, more whispers. Still, he felt stronger knowing he had truth on his side and his riders at his back. That night, the crew gathered again. The moon was high, and the ranch glowed silver in its light. The riders sat by the fire near the barn, their bikes parked in a half circle. Sparks rose into the air as wood cracked in the flames. "They will keep coming," Tom said quietly. "I can feel it. But I will not bend. This land is mine." Mark raised his cup. "Then we stand with you, every time. They may have papers, but we have loyalty. And loyalty wins longer than fear." The crew raised their cups together, their faces lit by firelight. The days that followed brought more tricks. Another letter came, this one claiming that Tom's barn was unsafe and needed inspection. Then a man in a suit appeared at the gate, trying to hand Tom a notice. Each time, Tom stood firm. Each time, the riders gathered. The HOA men grew frustrated. They had expected Tom to fold under pressure, to pay quietly or give in to their rules. Instead, they found a man who stood stronger each day, backed by a crew that never left his side. One evening, as the sun set red behind the hills, Tom stood on his porch watching the riders leave after another long talk. The engines rumbled away, fading into the distance. The ranch grew quiet again, but Tom felt no fear. He knew a final clash was coming, a moment when the HOA men would try one last push. And when that day came, he would be ready. The stars filled the sky, bright and endless. Tom whispered to himself, "This is my home, and I will guard it with every breath." The fire of determination burned in his chest, and the story moved toward its greatest test. The morning air was heavy with silence. Tom stood at the edge of his porch, his eyes scanning the road that stretched toward town. He had felt it for days now, a quiet tension growing like clouds before a storm. The letters, the strangers in suits, the false claims, they were all steps in a bigger plan. The HOA men were not done, not yet. By noon, the sound of engines reached the ranch again, but this time it was not the iron riders. A convoy of black cars and a white truck rolled down the dirt road, kicking up dust. Tom's chest tightened, but his face stayed calm. He knew who it was before the cars even stopped. Out stepped the tall HOA man, the same one who had shouted across Tom's fields weeks before. He wore a pressed suit now, and beside him were the other two men with clipboards. Behind them came more strangers, dressed in ties and jackets, carrying folders and papers. It was a small army of words, not weapons, but Tom understood their purpose. "This is it," Tom whispered to himself. Before he could step forward, the familiar sound of motorcycles filled the air. From the east road came the iron riders, their engines roaring like thunder. Dust rose as they pulled up beside the ranch, one after another, until the yard was lined with bikes. The riders dismounted and stood tall, forming a wall of loyalty behind Tom. Mark walked up first, his face steady. "We thought they might come today," he said quietly. "You don't face this alone." Tom nodded once. His heart felt lighter. The HOA man cleared his throat loudly. "Tom," he said, raising a folder high, "this is your final notice. You have ignored our letters, our calls, our demands. You are in violation of community law. If you do not comply today, we will move forward with legal action." Tom stepped off his porch and stood firm in the dirt, his boots planted, his eyes fixed on the man. "You do not own my land," he said calmly. "Your rules stop at the edge of your neighborhood. This ranch is mine, and you have no claim here." The tall man smirked. "We have documents. We have authority. You cannot fight us." Ben stepped forward from the line of riders, his deep voice carrying across the yard. "We have documents too. And they speak the truth. Your claim has no ground. You are wasting time and trying to scare a man who refuses to bow." The HOA men shifted uncomfortably, but the tall one pressed on. "We will see what a judge says." Rose crossed her arms, her eyes sharp. "Then take it to a judge. You'll lose, and when you do, the whole town will know you came after a man who owed you nothing." The riders nodded as one, their unity silent but powerful. The tall man opened his folder, pulling out papers covered in heavy text. He raised them high as if the paper itself gave him power. But before he could speak, a new voice cut through the air. A car had pulled up quietly at the edge of the ranch. From it stepped the lawyer friend that Ben had called earlier. He carried a slim briefcase and a calm expression. Walking forward, he greeted Tom with a nod, then turned toward the HOA men. I have reviewed your claims, he said clearly. This land is not listed under your authority. Your letters hold no legal ground. Your demands for fees are invalid. If you continue this false pursuit, you risk charges for harassment and trespass. The HOA men froze. Their faces shifted from pride to unease. The tall man's mouth opened, but no words came. He looked around as if the ground had shifted beneath him. The lawyer continued, his tone sharp but steady. Leave this man's ranch. Do not return unless you wish to face the law yourselves. This matter is closed. Silence fell. The only sound was the wind moving through the tall grass. At last, the tall HOA man lowered his papers. His shoulders slumped, and the false strength drained from his face. He turned to his men and muttered, "Let's go." One by one, they climbed into their cars. The engines started, and the convoy rolled back down the road, smaller now, weaker now. The dust they left behind seemed less threatening than before. The riders stood watching until the cars disappeared over the hill. Then, slowly, the tension broke. Laughter rose, strong and free, filling the yard like music. Tom turned to his crew, his heart full. "You stood with me every step," he said. "I will never forget that." Mark clapped him on the back. "We don't stand because we have to, Tom. We stand because you are one of us. That ranch is your life, and your life matters to us." Rose smiled. "They thought paper could break you. But paper cannot break loyalty." Ben nodded. "The truth is stronger than fear." Tom looked across the fields of his ranch, the barn standing proud, the horses grazing calmly, the fences shining in the sunlight. For weeks, the HOA men had tried to shake him, but they had failed. His land was safe, his friends were strong, and his spirit was unbroken. That evening, the riders stayed long at the ranch. They lit a fire, shared stories, and filled the night with the sound of music and laughter. The stars shone bright overhead, watching the family of riders who had chosen to stand together. When the fire burned low and the riders prepared to leave, Tom stood on his porch one last time. He watched their bikes roll into the distance, their engines echoing like a promise. He felt peace in his chest again, the peace of a man who had faced a storm and held his ground. The ranch was quiet once more, but this quiet felt different. It was not the silence of waiting for trouble. It was the silence of victory. Tom breathed deep, the cool night air filling his lungs. He looked at the sky and whispered, "This is my home. It always will be." And with that, his story found its end not in fear, not in loss, but in strength, loyalty, and the power of truth.